We've all been hearing a lot lately about how AI stands to disrupt how we all live and work. From the promise of making faster, more accurate medical diagnoses, to helping recruit employees, to making us all more efficient, to those potential downsides, such as job displacement or the ability to do work that was once reserved for humans. I'd like to talk to you about a little different problem space today, and that's what happens when organizations start using AI to manage their human employees and the impact that it may have on trust in the workplace when algorithms start doing the work that was historically reserved for human beings. I'm going to talk a little bit about machine learning, which is generally we can think of as a subclass of artificial intelligence that combines three important elements. First, it uses complex statistical algorithms to help make decisions, making predictions and classification choices well beyond what a human could do, or even a human using a computer could model over many, many iterations. It also capitalizes on modern computing power and the ability to run simultaneous predictive models all at the same time, well beyond what a human statistician could do. Finally, machine learning relies on the vast troves of structured and unstructured data that's available in the digital age. When we're talking about unstructured data, machine learning algorithms have the ability to capture things that we never would have considered data before. Imagine in an interview setting, being able to use information such as the voice intonation at a particular point in time of somebody applying for a position, and use that sort of thing as a way of predicting who your best potential employees will be. In fact, many organizations are starting to use machine learning for their performance management tasks that were usually held in place by human managers. A 2019 Mercer Global Talents Trends study found that 88% of companies are already using machine learning technology. In fact, a recent report by the commissioner of the EEOC found that in 2023, this work is even more pervasive than we thought it would be just in 2019. This includes using artificial intelligence and algorithms for employee selection and filtering resumes, monitoring and assessing employee performance, identifying skill sets to decide who would be most effective on a project team, making decisions about compensation, promotion, and retention of existing employees, identifying additional training needs within your workforce, and remediation and disciplinary action is actually now being done by machine learning algorithms. In fact, commercially available enterprise-level AI packages are likely to greatly accelerate this use. By enterprise level, I mean two things. First, these will be commercially available, where you can go buy an off-the-shelf package from IBM or some other vendor to do AI tasks within your organization without having to have that expertise in-house. But the other important thing to know about enterprise-level software is, as opposed to just your traditional HR department records, we're talking about an algorithm being able to access anything that leaves a digital trace in your organization, from keycard swipes to logins to emails, and treat that like data. But within a performance management context, some tensions start to emerge. When you're using algorithms to manage humans instead of human managers, we're potentially going to have some trust issues. For starters, that same Mercer study I referenced a minute ago also found that employee trust in organizations has been eroding for over a decade, and we're at an almost all-time low, at least since the modern part of the Industrial Revolution, where people just don't trust their employers anymore. In general, we also find that human beings have what we call an algorithm aversion. What I mean by that is, despite the fact that we know algorithms can be more effective at making predictions than human beings can, or at classifying things, we generally don't trust them because we assume that the mistakes they make will be immutable. And in fact, in some early research on using machine learning algorithms for human resource tasks, we find that people don't believe that these algorithms can take sort of personalized data into account, that it sort of reduces people to quantification. And finally, the solutions that we have out there for how to deal with algorithms when they do make mistakes are really based around the idea of users trusting algorithms more. But if we think about employees who are being evaluated by these algorithms, they're not, in fact, users of the algorithm, they're targets of it. So that's going to have some implications for trust. Also, if we were to understand how trust usually flows in organizations, we would find that algorithms are kind of bad candidates for building trust within a work context. We define trust within the field of management or organizational behavior as the willingness of a person to make themselves vulnerable to another. Now, when we're evaluating whether or not we'd want to make ourselves vulnerable to another human being, we usually evaluate their trustworthiness across three domains. The first is ability. which is our general belief that the person is competent to do a particular task. Second, we evaluate their trustworthiness based on their integrity. Do they make decisions based on clear and acceptable principles that we can understand? And finally, benevolence. Does the decision maker have intentions to sort of do good by us and consider our interests in making their decisions? Well, let's imagine a manager relying exclusively on algorithms to make decisions about their human employees. We're going to have ability problems. We know that people are very intolerant of even small mistakes with algorithms. People are not going to trust a manager who relies on these tools exclusively, in part because they're not even demonstrating their own ability, and in part because they believe that when the machines make a mistake, they'll continue to do so. We're also going to see integrity problems. People are unlikely to trust human managers over relying on algorithms because employees have really little insight into the processes AI decision aids use in generating decisions or making recommendations. This will probably be even further complicated when we talk about these third-party enterprise-level packages where, for licensure reasons or other purposes, or just the sheer complexity of the algorithm, employees are unlikely to understand how these decisions are being made about them. And finally, we're going to find a benevolence problem. Employees are likely to know that these performance management algorithms were ultimately built for the benefit of the organization and not for them. They're not going to necessarily trust that the algorithm's goal is to do good by them or to consider their interests. Taken together, if managers over-rely on these tools, despite their predictive validity, we might find that we're having major trust problems in organizations. But complicating matters even more, we know that some aspects of performance management benefit from the objectivity of machine learning. People who do research and build machine learning algorithms for selection are increasingly finding ways to be able to reduce race or gender bias from hiring decisions by using algorithms. So the objectivity can be a beneficial thing in some cases. However, if you think about performance appraisal and performance management, accuracy and being as predictively accurate as possible sometimes conflicts with managerial goals for performance management. Imagine for a second that you had a long quarter where there were a lot of pressures and you were understaffed. A manager might sort of inflate everybody's raises and inflate everybody's evaluations for the sake of maintaining morale. Or if you have an employee who's historically great but has had a sick child at home for the past few months, maybe you're going to be motivated by leniency. Or if you have employees that are just learning a new role, you don't really want to beat them up for underperforming early so that they can learn the task really well. Algorithms are very bad at these things. Complicating it even worse, most of the recommendations for fixing problems with algorithms involve an expert actively monitoring them and then going in and making changes to help the algorithm reflect its original intended ground truth. For example, if I have an algorithm that's supposed to be helping for example, choose best transportation routes and it's wrong, I can go back in and add the correct times later to help retrain the algorithm. By contrast, a human manager is unlikely, a line-level manager is unlikely to have the access or the expertise to go in and directly tweak these algorithms when they make decisions they don't agree with or deviate from that ground truth of managing performance well. So what's going to happen? Well, managers may choose to work around the algorithms. Now, if we think historically, managers have always worked around policies or control systems that they don't find appropriate. If you have an employee that because of a school drop-off need is always a few minutes late, maybe you just let that time card slide a little bit if they're otherwise doing their job well, and that's an accommodation you can make. But note, though, that historically, when managers work around what they consider to be bad policies, the policy doesn't change. It stays static. Now let's think for a second about machine learning algorithms. Let's say that you have a performance management software on your employees' computers that are working from home that just makes sure that they're engaged and at their computer. If you tell your employees during a meeting, one thing that might be a problem is if there's no activity on your computer, mouse, or keyboard, it's going to think you're inactive. Managers may tell their employees, hey, just jiggle your mouse. Well, unlike other bad policies or control systems, the machine learning algorithm may actually readjust its estimated ground truth and believe that employees jiggle their mice all day long. In other words, the policy or the practice that goes in place from an algorithm actually gets worse sometimes when managers try to work around it. So this has led to the question that underlies a lot of my current research, which is how do managers build and maintain subordinate trust when they have to share control of their performance management role with machine learning algorithms and are doing so in real time. As opposed to annual reviews, that process seems to be going away in most organizations as they move towards a more dynamic, real-time approach. And with algorithms as tools, employers and managers are going to have to make decisions very quickly about how they manage people with these tools. So my research, I'm trying to focus on recognizing what's different about performance management than other tasks that we might be using machine learning algorithms for. For starters, we know that predictive accuracy may not always be the goal of human managers trying to maintain performance over the long run. We know that managers sometimes have to have other strategies and other logics than optimizing prediction. We also know that human managers aren't expert users, and so things they might do to try to fix problems with the algorithm may either be ineffective or may cause other problems. And to do this, we have to identify how managers may add judgment to the accuracy of the technology. The machines will always beat us at classification and prediction. However, we have the ability to exercise judgment or make trade-off decisions that the machines can't do. So an optimum requires human managers to be able to insert judgment and discretion in ways that don't disrupt the ability of the tools to engage in prediction. If we're to think about how we traditionally think about human beings interfacing with technology, our friends in information sciences have suggested that the best way to manage AI systems are what we call human-in-the-loop systems. So what this means is that the AI model generates some sort of output. It makes a weather prediction. The human then can confirm and say, yes, it was in fact a sunny day, and confirm it, and the machine learning algorithm learns and adapts. Or if the weather report didn't work right, the human can go in, relabel the data, say, no, it was actually a stormy day, and the algorithm learns. But as we just discussed, human managers may not be able to have that level of interface with the technology. This adds some extra complexity to this loop because managers may seek to augment data outside of the algorithm. Now the trick here is that the AI then may not learn and develop over time, but those outputs may still be impacted. So the focus on my research is how do we build robust systems where managers can benefit from the predictive validity of these algorithms while also inserting discretion in ways that aren't going to disrupt the total system. And the way that we're going about this is understanding the idea that while algorithms add accuracy, managers may be able to add what we call reflexivity. Now, reflexivity is a concept that's been around in sociology and social theory for some time, but it's defined as the capacity of an agent or an institution to recognize the influence of socializing forces on their behavior and consciously exercise agency to change their own fate. So the classic example of reflexivity might be a child growing up in an impoverished environment, recognizes that there are limited options and that a lot of the activities available to them could just get them in trouble. So they make the decision to spend their weekends in the library and do things to change their own education and change their own fate. Well, it turns out that machine learning algorithms, for being as smart as they are, have no sense of reflexivity. They're dynamic and they change, but they're never aware of what's actually driving their own decisions. For example, a few years ago, Amazon had a selection algorithm to help them find new employees. They turned this algorithm loose on their real performance appraisal data and then started hiring from there. The problem was the algorithm actually introduced a tremendous amount of gender bias. Why? Well, Amazon was a technology company. They did not have as many female employees, and there was gender bias appearing in their performance evaluations. If the algorithm is trained on that data, even an algorithm behaving in ways that are appearing to be objective will just recapitulate that bias that showed up in its training data. So these algorithms can't possibly be self-aware enough to be reflexive. Similarly, if we were to look at robot vacuums, if anybody has ever owned one, the fundamental problem in robot vacuums that's just now being solved is the issue of pet waste. For example, a robot vacuum senses when something is dirty, decides to clean more. You can find videos on YouTube that will give you hilarious and disturbing examples of where that goes awry. So human beings need to insert reflexivity into these systems while also allowing the algorithms to maintain accuracy. Now, within our model, we suggest that managers have two cyclical roles and 4 behaviors for creating trust. So there's 4 things in total that managers must do when engaging with algorithms for performance management. Now, the first role we suggest they're placed in is the role of translator. And as a translator of algorithms, they need to decode the nature of the data collected and the architecture of the algorithm for subordinates. The hard thing about this is subordinates, just like managers, are unlikely to be machine learning experts, and so knowing your audience is going to be very critical for this. Somebody who has a PhD in information sciences may have a very different understanding of an algorithm than somebody who maybe took some calculus as part of their MBA, which is very different than how somebody who's a warehouse worker at Amazon might understand performance management algorithms. Second, the role of augmenter requires that managers remain vigilant to correct for unforeseen impact of algorithmic decision-making, and do so both inside and outside of the algorithm's architecture. But they can't do this haphazardly, or trust will be eroded even more, because the algorithm will start to mispredict more, and managers' behaviors might be viewed as capricious rather than heedful. So without going too deep, as a high-level summary, managers can sometimes build reflexivity in 4 key ways. Now, the first thing they have to do in that translator role we just discussed is recognize that algorithms are often inscrutable. In other words, they don't lend themselves well to being evaluated by employees. But the different reasons why they may be inscrutable may have very different implications for trust. First of all, algorithms may be inscrutable because they're low in transparency. In other words, the manufacturer of the algorithm, the developer, or the company itself has deliberately chosen to lock people out of the functioning of the algorithm so that they can't look under the hood. Now, that's very different than interpretability, for example, which looks at your ability to understand it as an individual difference. Again, somebody's ability in math skills or technology expertise may be the limit there. If a manager, for example, is able to interpret it well, their own competence will look high in the eyes of employees. Next is explainability, and explainability really gets at the idea that even if the algorithm functions well and is very predictive, can you explain it in a way that's meaningful to people? Imagine for a second that you've just been told that you need to attend an additional sexual harassment training at work. Why? Well, the algorithm has detected that you tend to use your web browser for non-work tasks around 10 a.m. Your emails to colleagues of the opposite gender are about 15% longer on average than they are to people of your same gender. And also, you tend to use a lot of emojis in your emails. And for those reasons, you'll be going to an additional sexual harassment training. Well, even if the algorithm's good at predicting sexual harassment and training may thwart it, employees are not likely to respond well when explainability of the algorithm, or what it even means, is low. And finally, opacity just means these things become so complex over time that at any given moment, it's really difficult to unpack them. If we think about these 4 different reasons why algorithms may be inscrutable or difficult to understand, an effective manager has to recognize that there's something symbolic in each of those, and employees' trust is really going to depend on understanding why. Second, managers need to be able to identify alternative logics beyond maximizing predictive accuracy. Employees care about things like their privacy or their dignity. So managers have to be able to understand how those things are going to impact employee trust and the limitations of the algorithms. Within that role of augmenting algorithms, managers also have to find ways to embed alternative logics into the configuration within or outside of the algorithm. What I mean by this is, as opposed to just telling people to jiggle their mouse, finding ways to augment the algorithm by reaching out to a developer or having a path within the organization that allows new data to be included will make the algorithms better over time. And finally, managers have to be wise enough to envision how augmentation within or around the algorithm will bend back into the algorithm itself. Again, going back to the example of mouse jiggling, if a manager is unaware that starving an algorithm of data or feeding it misleading data, putting tape over cameras or things like that, if they're unaware of how that will actually affect the algorithm or the architecture itself, over time and in the aggregate, these algorithms will actually become worse and create even more trust issues within organizations. So what are some basic implications for the directions of this research? Well, for managers, we know that algorithms may be, under certain conditions, unbiased, but over-relying on them for performance management, really just trusting the algorithm to do everything because you believe it to be objective, is unlikely to build trust from employees. Second, we need to think about scaling explanations to the ability of their employees. And if we can't explain how an algorithm works, we need to at least be able to explain why to employees. We know that informational justice, or how information is transmitted to employees, has significant impacts on just about anything an employer would care about, from turnover to employee theft. Third, you have to consider how decisions outside of the algorithm may impact the system. Human beings in general are not good at systems level thinking and thinking about how our own behavior will contribute to the large scale aggregate. For example, when there's a car accident on the interstate and we all slow down just to get a 2-second look, it can back traffic up for an hour. But we're not necessarily inherently good at thinking about how our individual decisions impact aggregate systems. In the machine learning era, we all need to be better at that if we're going to maintain employee trust. For organizations, training managers on the general principles of the tools, rather than just saying, we've taken away this responsibility from you or given you a tool to make life easier, managers need to be trained on how these tools are actually working, what they do, and why. Also, organizations would probably be wise, even though there's a rush to capitalize on all the benefits of these technologies, to maybe avoid off-the-shelf options if they lock your organization out of the architecture. To that end, the EEOC has found that a lot of products out there now for employee selection are being argued to be EEOC compliant. Now, that may be true. They actually may not invoke gender or race bias once they come off the shelf. On the other hand, once they've been trained on your organization's data for a while, there's no guarantee that these tools won't become biased over time. And if your organization doesn't have the ability to look under the hood or modify these tools, then it's probably not a great long-term choice for you to be using. And third, organizations need to be thoughtful about creating feedback channels between those line-level managers that are doing the work of building trust with employees and with IT to make sure the algorithms are actually doing what we want them to do. Again, if managers don't have the ability to directly engage, help change the algorithms, we know they're going to work around them, and sometimes in ways that ultimately, in the aggregate, will damage the functionality of the algorithm.